But at the end, you finished 7th. You did a good quality in front of your teammate. There's some positive from this weekend going ahead, or not? Because Charles didn't see so much positives. He say it's going to be all difficult races for Ferrari. What do you think for the next ones?
Yeah, well, I mean, firstly, the guys are pushing so hard each weekend. I feel pain for all the team, from catering to marketing to the guys in the garage and engineers who show up every weekend, and they really do give absolutely everything. But the car we have is it's not, unfortunately, of the level of the guys up ahead of us, particularly as they've had some upgrades, and we can't match them. So we're on the knife edge trying to get as close as we can. But I don't know. I think there was potential for us to be further ahead this weekend. I think in qualifying, we still are not extracting the full potential of the car. We didn't in the last race, and we didn't this weekend. I think there was potential to have been third or fourth on the grid this weekend if we had extracted the tyre performance and not queued at the end of the pit lane, for example. And in the race, I don't think we necessarily. We're kind of on par pace-wise, maybe with at least a couple of cars ahead of us, but obviously not quicker. So I think if we can get our qualifying fixed, which is very, very hard to do against these quick cars, then maybe we can get slightly better results. But I mean, ultimately, we're still fighting for 4th, 5th, 6th, at best. So yeah.
Lewis Hamilton furious, Ferrari silent, a brake failure that could have ended in disaster, and words the cameras never aired. What did Lewis _really_ say after that dramatic finish in Singapore? What truth was kept off the broadcast? Stay right here, because what Hamilton revealed behind closed doors changes everything for Ferrari's season. When the noise of the Marina Bay circuit finally faded, when the media lights dimmed and the crowd began to leave, Lewis Hamilton was still sitting inside Ferrari's motorhome. The atmosphere was heavy, the kind that hangs after a race where victory was possible but never real. Those who passed by described silence, not anger, not shouting, just the silence of a man who knew what needed to be said and was choosing his words carefully. And when he finally spoke, those in the room realized they were witnessing a moment that would define the rest of Ferrari's season. Hamilton began not with blame, but with observation. He recounted every decision made since Friday practice, every temperature reading, every delay in qualifying. His words were precise, stripped of emotion, yet loaded with weight. "We knew what was coming," he said quietly, "and we waited for it to happen." Those words cut deeper than any public criticism could have. They were not aimed at one engineer or strategist. They were aimed at a culture, at the hesitation that has haunted Ferrari through generations of leadership. For the first time, Hamilton had shifted from driver to reformer. The team principal, Fred Vasseur, listened without interruption. He had already reviewed the telemetry, already seen how close the car came to failure. What Hamilton brought was not data, but perspective, the view from inside the cockpit, where milliseconds feel like minutes and trust in the team becomes the only thing holding a driver together. "You cannot win like this," Hamilton said. "We are not one team on Sundays. We are a collection of reactions." It was not an accusation, it was a diagnosis. The problem was no longer mechanical. It was human. Outside that room, word began to spread through the paddock. Journalists who had been denied access sensed something unusual was unfolding behind those closed doors. By the time the team released its official statement, a brief note about thermal management challenges, whispers had already reached rival teams. Hamilton had spoken bluntly, and Ferrari knew it. The message was simple. Mistakes could no longer be disguised as misfortune. In a sport built on control, Ferrari had lost its rhythm. That night, in Maranello, Vasseur called for an unscheduled debrief with senior engineers and department heads. The tone was urgent, stripped of the usual corporate phrasing. The question was not how the brakes failed, but why communication failed first. Why had a warning from the driver at lap 3 not triggered a shift in strategy? Why had confidence in simulation been valued more than feedback from the man in the seat? The answers were uncomfortable. Too many layers of confirmation. Too many voices afraid to challenge assumptions. Ferrari's greatest weakness was not in its machinery, but in its hierarchy. For Hamilton, the turning point came not from what he lost, but from what he understood. Singapore had shown him that talent alone cannot compensate for inertia. He had joined Ferrari to chase legacy, to prove that greatness could be reborn in red. But in that motorhome, surrounded by silence and reflection, he realized that change would not come from podiums, it would come from confrontation. His words that night were not meant to divide, they were meant to awaken. The following morning, Ferrari's factory engineers received a transcript of the debrief titled simply Post-Race Reflection. Inside were 2 sentences highlighted in red: "We are not learning, we are repeating." Ferrari arrived in Singapore with genuine belief that their months of work were finally converging into something consistent. Lewis Hamilton, after weeks of struggle to understand the SF25, had declared during free practice that the car was starting to talk to him. That phrase resonated through the paddock, not because it was poetic, but because it marked a moment of connection between driver and machine that had been missing all year. The telemetry supported that optimism. Hamilton had found a setup that finally matched his driving style, with balanced aerodynamics and stability through the slower corners that dominate Marina Bay. It felt like a turning point. But Formula One punishes complacency faster than any sport. The same adjustments that made the car alive in free practice began to unravel under the heat of competition. In qualifying, Ferrari made the decision that would shape the entire weekend. As Q3 began, Hamilton sat waiting in the garage, engine silent, tires cooling minute by minute. The plan was to send him out last, hoping for clear air. But as so often with Ferrari strategy in recent years, the logic failed under pressure. The tires dropped below their operating window, losing 5 or 6 degrees that could never be recovered in one warm-up lap. The result was visible the moment Hamilton turned into the first corner. Grip gone, balance uncertain, confidence fading. He finished 6th, a position that looked respectable on paper, but hollow in context. Hamilton's radio messages during the session told a different story. "We are always at the back of a line. Every time we wait, we lose tire temperature. Every weekend it is the same." Those words were not frustration in the heat of the moment. They were the expression of a pattern, a repetition that defines the difference between Ferrari and the front-running teams. In modern Formula One, races are won as much in the garage as on the track. A delay of seconds in the pits can erase months of technical progress. And at Ferrari, that truth seems to repeat endlessly. When race day arrived, the problems deepened. The extreme humidity of Singapore magnified the SF25's Achilles heel, thermal management. The car overheated its tires and brakes faster than expected, forcing Hamilton to adopt a conservative rhythm from the very start. The engineers tried to manage temperatures through lift and coast commands, but the system that had been designed to trap heat for qualifying now trapped too much. It was an engineering paradox, one that Hamilton could feel through the steering wheel long before the data confirmed it. By lap 3, the left front brake was already beyond its ideal range. The team knew, yet they kept him out. That decision, in hindsight, became symbolic of Ferrari's 2025 season. A team so desperate to prove progress that it kept racing against reality. Hamilton, known for his mechanical empathy and precision, managed the car masterfully, adjusting brake bias, modifying corner entries, doing everything humanly possible to delay the inevitable. But the numbers were against him. Every braking zone added heat, every corner increased pressure. And when the sparks finally burst from the carbon disc, the story was already written. What followed was not a failure of talent, but failure of structure. Behind the scenes, the sense of déjà vu was overwhelming. The same strategic indecision that had cost results in earlier races had returned in its most dangerous form. Hamilton's post-race tone reflected that awareness. This was not a complaint about luck or misfortune. It was about systemic issues, miscommunication, risk calculation, operational timing. He had seen it before from the outside. Now he was living it from within. Ferrari's internal mechanisms, the very systems designed to protect performance, were instead generating failure. And that, more than any broken component, was the true problem in Singapore. From the outside, the brake failure looked sudden. But for those who understand the inner workings of a Formula One car, it was the final link in a chain of small, avoidable errors that began days before the race. Ferrari's SF25 had carried a known weakness since its launch: thermal management. In circuits like Marina Bay, with relentless braking zones and almost no airflow to cool the systems, that weakness becomes catastrophic. The engineers had tried to compensate by narrowing the brake ducts, a configuration meant to retain heat during qualifying laps. But in the tropical night of Singapore, the heat stayed trapped. The system that was meant to protect performance instead became its executioner. Telemetry from Ferrari confirmed that the problem began early. The left front brake showed temperatures exceeding the safe range within the opening laps. When Hamilton reported something feels off on the pedal, it was not instinct, it was experience. His data was already flashing red on the pit wall. But the team hesitated. They hoped that with careful driving and controlled braking zones, the temperatures would stabilize. That hope turned into denial. With every lap, the system degraded. By mid-race, the pressure sensors were no longer reading stable values, forcing Hamilton to switch to lift and coast to reduce stress. What followed was a masterclass in damage control. Driving a car with inconsistent brakes is one of the most terrifying tasks in racing. Every corner becomes a question mark. Yet Hamilton's ability to adapt was extraordinary. He altered his braking points, softened his steering inputs, and used the car's engine braking to stabilize the rear. The difference between success and disaster was measured in fractions of a second. And still, he was catching Antonelli. That pursuit, with compromised hardware, displayed why Hamilton remains one of the most complete drivers in the sport's history. It was not only raw speed, it was precision under pressure, calculation under chaos. When the sparks burst from the front left, the audience gasped, but Hamilton stayed composed. He had been nursing the issue for nearly an hour. The engineers later admitted that the problem had begun as early as lap 2. Fred Vasseur, calm but visibly disappointed, explained after the race that Hamilton had driven almost the entire distance managing the brakes manually. It was a situation no team should have allowed, yet somehow Ferrari had convinced themselves it was manageable. That misjudgment revealed not just a technical flaw, but a philosophical one, an unwillingness to act decisively when evidence demanded it. Behind the calm surface of Ferrari's garage, the engineers knew the truth. The SF25's cooling architecture was compromised by design. The car's aerodynamics required it to run close to the ground, reducing the airflow that reached the internal ducts. On city circuits like Singapore, where speeds are lower and airflow limited, the problem becomes impossible to hide. It was the perfect example of how one design philosophy can work brilliantly in theory, yet fail under real conditions. Ferrari had built a car that excelled on paper, but faltered under the heat of a race weekend. And so, Hamilton's failure was not a single moment of bad luck. It was the sum of design compromises, engineering trade-offs, and operational hesitation. In a championship where precision defined success, Ferrari had delivered a car that could not regulate its own survival. That reality forces a larger question. If a team cannot trust its machinery to endure 90 minutes in Singapore, how can it ever build confidence for a title campaign?